Hi, my name is Adam Feiberg, and I'm here today with Mark Becker.
Hi, Adam. How's it going?
All right, and we are here to talk Harlem Stories. Today, we're going to be discussing a bunch of topics today. Broke it up into a few episodes. First one I want to talk about today is Manhattanville. And Manhattanville is, always been this transitional neighborhood. It was always kind of lost in the match. A lot of people called it West Harlem. Some people still do. I think of West Harlem as three different distinct neighborhoods. They're actually describing the western side of Harlem rather than Central Harlem or East Harlem. So there's a lot of confusion in what the neighborhood names are called. But Manhattanville is an old-time neighborhood name, and it goes back into its shipping days. At one point, it was a shipping harbor for the most part. And it makes sense because it's pretty close to sea level. So, ultimately it's one of the lower points. Ironically, most of Upper Manhattan is more toward the higher end of the equation. And I think the best way to describe it, since, a lot of people don't really know the barriers, and I'd say the southern barrier is always called into question. The northern barrier, not so much, but eastern barrier a little bit is questioned, and western is the Hudson River. So pretty much sandwiched between 125th and 135th, the Hudson River on one side. And that eastern border is always kind of in question. I consider it really like St. Nicholas area, because then you're starting to get into Central Harlem. But, I think like for real estate purposes, I think St. Nicholas is typically going to be that eastern border. Primarily because you have the end of St. Nicholas Park over there, and that usually delineates, I guess, with the original rock outcroppings that you can see there from original Manhattan's schist. That's usually the defining differences with most of the neighborhoods in Upper Manhattan, is it tends to be divided by a physical barrier.
And along the water there is the remnants of the old Fairway Market, where my wife actually worked for many years.
And my dad, except when my dad was there, it was actually a meat packing plant back in those days. He was their bookkeeper going to Baruch, and ironically, he was their bookkeeper, and it was a very different neighborhood back then. But yes, later it wound up becoming Fairway, and now, as of recently, and this goes into our discussion later on as well, but ultimately the Fairway, they expanded too much too quickly. They wound up going bankrupt. They kept a couple locations open, but that 125th Street location was not one of them. So yeah, in that 125th Street area, Columbia ultimately was the buyer of the bankrupted properties, and Columbia hasn't announced what they plan on doing with that space, but it adds to their new campus expansion area, now almost just about 20 acres in total. So that's one of the big things that I wanted to talk about, in our conversation today, because it does dominate so much of the neighborhood. So Manhattanville over here, since we are starting to talk about Columbia, that campus expansion that we've been talking about, Columbia has wanted to expand their campus since the 1960s, and ultimately wound up causing riots as they wanted in, I think it was 67 or 68, as they wanted to expand into Morningside Park. And the problem with that is they were going to have two different entrances, one on the Harlem side, one on the Morningside side, and it created, at least at a bare minimum, the perception of a racial injustice, having two separate entrances. Harlem being perceived as primarily black, and was at the time, where Morningside was primarily white. So, obviously that created all sorts of problems. Well, now they've found, fast forward into the future, and one of the reasons, that I was considering buying into the neighborhood in the early 2000s was that Columbia is now, moving forward, and they've already now built a few of the, or much of their first phase of their expansion, but they were planning on a roughly 17 and a half acre, something like that, campus expansion into Manhattanville. And ultimately, while there were some aspects of it that were quite debatable or questionable in terms of, how they went about it, in terms of, let's say, eminent domain. At the same time, ultimately, I remember walking past that neighborhood before while they were still fighting those fights, and I remember walking past those neighborhoods, and I can count on one hand, in the 15 minutes that it took me to walk through the area, how many cars would pass. So they were saying it was a blighted area, and I would have to agree on that based on just the amount of both foot traffic and car traffic that I was seeing, and there was hardly anything going on over there.
So there were objections to the changing of the neighborhood character, but it seems like what you're saying is that there wasn't really much there. And I always find it interesting walking around the city when there's something new. I can never really remember what was there before.
I have that same issue all the time. My friends and I play a game with that. Do you remember what was there before?
Yeah, because that area, right, if you're taking the 1 train, it goes elevated, as we talked about in our last episode. It goes elevated there, and then, so if you're heading north on the 1 train and you look to your left, there's a bunch of new shiny buildings that Columbia has constructed, but for the life of me, I can't remember what was there before.
So I can tell you, since I did have some ties to it and I was watching it carefully, it was part of the reason why I did buy in the area. But I can tell you there were some restaurants, there were a lot of auto repair places in the area.
Right.
But ultimately, more or less, aside from that fairway. And a few other car shops, there was a gas station, but there wasn't all that much activity in that vicinity over there. So there were a lot of, there was a diner that was there that my dad used to go to a lot on a regular basis, but and a couple of restaurants that were in that area have moved locations. They've stayed, within the neighborhood itself or just bordering on the neighborhood, but they've stayed in the area. So, for instance, and I know you brought it up before, Dinosaur Barbecue. They were in the area, and they've since moved a few blocks over. There was Floridita, which was also a restaurant in the area over there, and they actually moved near Dinosaur Barbecue. But yeah, there were a few businesses like the auto repair shops that wound up leaving. There was a large self-storage company that was over there. They wound up leaving. So it gives you an idea of like some of the things that were going on there. But ultimately, this new campus expansion now. There's a lot of things that Columbia has not released yet, but what they do have out there on the internet is their plans for phase 1. And actually, it's not even complete what they've posted there, but they originally had 5 buildings planned, and they now have 5 buildings built. So they have two of the buildings are part of the MBA program. That's going to be the new school for the MBA program. There's going to be, or there actually is, a science center. I know there's an art center. I know there's one other building that I'm not placing at the moment. I think it's like a public center, there. And ultimately, what wasn't announced in this plan that they're actually in the process of constructing, because I think it was an addition to the original plan, which was the corner of 125th and Broadway. There was the McDonald's, and I know we discussed this in a previous episode, but that property where the McDonald's is, they demolished the McDonald's. Ultimately, the McDonald's will get a retail space there, but it's going to be student and faculty housing. When I passed by there a few days ago, they were already above where the subway, is above ground, and so I imagine at this point they've got to be about 4 or 5 stories tall minimum at this stage.
That's one of the remarkable things about that. What you just said is, how often do you see a McDonald's go out of business? It's got to be so rare.
Well, in this case, it's not like they're really truly going out of business.
Well, you said they're going to put like a little snack bar in the new student lounge there.
Well, they're actually going to have a full-blown retail location down on the ground floor. So McDonald's will be getting some space back. It's not going to be the whole drive-through thing that they had before, but they will be getting a retail space back over there. So I guess it's not out of business. It's more like see you later.
It's on hold.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, McDonald's, they choose their locations pretty wisely. So and with a bunch of students living upstairs, I imagine that
Hey, it's hard to miss out on that one.
Yeah, exactly. But the important thing to note on this whole campus expansion is that Columbia is investing $6 to $7 billion, and it sounds like it's probably going to even wind up being more because there were a few properties that they acquired that weren't a part of the original plan. So it sounds like it might even be a little over $7 billion, by the time all is said and done. Now, they've only announced phase one, and they've now completed phase one. We know that based on their conversations, and if you look at the map that they put out there online, they do have a campus map, and you'll see like there is spaces for other buildings that they haven't announced what they plan on doing yet. So that's part of it. So that first thing is entirely completed. And just to review, they're taking a look at what I've written over here. I've already mentioned that there's a science center, the 2 business school, the Center for the Arts, and a building that houses a community gathering space, which is an auditorium. It's a meeting and event spaces and communal work areas. Down on the retail level, they also have a public outdoor plaza. There's a rock climbing gym and a small food court within the new campus buildings. So I know like there's this really large cafe, Dear Mama, is located there. Like great space if you're in that area and just want to meet for coffee because it's not going to be crowded. And they do have the outdoor seating in the nicer months too. That new 6 building that wasn't part of the original plan, that's going to be part of that 34-story residential tower. And now that they're above the height of the subway, my guess is you'll see those additional 30 stories or so going up. Probably over the next year, we'll see that top out, is my guess.
Well, I hope the windows can't open in that. It would be a shame for somebody to toss something out the window and land on a subway car.
I imagine that's not the only building in the city that's had that issue, but I'm thinking because of the elevated nature of it, Brooklyn and Queens they probably have a bunch of properties like that bumping up against the subway.
Oh, actually, I mean, not to get off topic, but if you've ever taken I think it's the D train to deep Brooklyn, if you go all the way down towards Coney Island, I think it's the 9th, it might be the F train. There's actually between Fort Hamilton Parkway, I believe it is, and maybe 18th Avenue, there's a section of it's either the F or the D that comes literally within like 5 feet of an apartment building window.
Wow.
It's bananas.
I know even if you look at Yankee Stadium, even much closer to Harlem, Yankee Stadium, that what is it, the 4 line over there or 6 line?
Yeah, 4.
Which is right next to the stadium. And it's not as close as 5 feet, but it's probably within 15 feet.
Yeah, if you want to watch a game, just keep cruising by and get off at the next stop, then go back.
My mom actually grew up across the street from the old Yankee Stadium, and you could go to the rooftop, and see at least some of the action.
Just like Wrigley.
Yeah. I mentioned going back to our topic because I know we're going to be tight for time. There's a lot of information in this episode, jam-packed. Columbia has already announced, that, phase 1, they haven't released part of the other part of it, but there's a 2.5-acre brownfield site on West 130th and 131st, between Broadway and 12th. That's all been announced. That the only thing that's been announced on that end is that there's a cleanup of contaminated soil and removal of the oil and fuel tanks.
What is a brownfield site?
Brownfield site is usually there's going to be like oil and gas, in the ground. Usually like
sort of
tanks.
An abandoned, got it.
Yeah, this was a very heavy manufacturing area at one point, so that all makes sense.
Sure.
But they're also going to include the MTA bus station that's in that area as well, just west of Broadway. So, they haven't announced what they're going to plan on doing on that. Now, I know the MTA basically arranged with Columbia. They were going to hold on to that property for a number of years, but at some point there would be a transition on over. So on the very edge of that over there's a relatively new park called the Harlem Piers Park. It's on the Hudson River, right by where that fairway was.
Sure, I've been there.
Yeah, and if you remember it, and this is going back to the memory and whatnot, I remember it being used as like pretty much a junkyard area where there was just all sorts of debris and cars and tires and trash, all strewn about in that area. They cleaned all that up along the Hudson and now made it into this beautiful park with a kayak launch. And I know that there was a restaurant that was moored right off the docks over there, and you've got fishing opportunities. So they really set it up so that it really could be something special. But they also had in mind, when they built out that Harlem Piers Park, they had in mind, number one, that it could be a launching dock in that vicinity over there for a commuter ferry. That was long discussed, and I haven't heard any conversations about that anytime recently. Or perhaps, and if you go up to that, along that 12th Avenue strip over there, there was that, there were a group of restaurants that were, in one of the buildings. That building where there was a grouping of restaurants and nightclubs and whatnot was originally a train station building. So there's a possibility the MTA, especially now that as of today, good timing for us, the MTA just announced that that Long Island Railroad will now stop at Grand Central.
It's awesome.
So the reason why, even though that has nothing to do with Harlem, it actually does, because the MTA, in order to them to potentially add 125th Street Station, on the far west side, right around there, around 12th Avenue or so, what was stopping them is they needed to first add that east side access from Long Island, clear some of the traffic that was on the west side from Penn Station, and those. There was all sorts of interconnected aspects to all that. But that might ultimately lead us to potentially a West Side 125th Street Metro North station.
Well, you mentioned the kayaks. What do we know about the water quality there? Is anything?
So we know that there's the part of Riverbank.
Is it going to burn your lips off if you jump in there?
I know people that have done it, and the answer was no, but I don't know. Personally, I wouldn't feel as comfortable swimming over there or kayak launch, but some people might.
Sure.
I don't know. I haven't tested the water or know what the water test might be.
Next episode.
Yeah, maybe another episode we'll get that deeper down into that. Although that doesn't help us sell real estate, does it? So ultimately, I do know that they have been working toward these processes of making the water better and cleaning potential up. I mean, because even if you feel like the kayak launch is not something suitable for today, I mean, they're building it for tomorrow as well. So ultimately, I think these are all great things in the grand scheme of it, and hopefully they can continue with the progress. So that's part of all this equation. Now, there's the news that just actually hit yesterday, and I'd assume the location. They didn't exactly say where, but it sounds like West Harlem Piers Park would also be the location of what they announced could be a giant Ferris wheel, much like that they have like the London Eye, or I know Orlando has one of these giant Ferris wheels. But yeah, like 180-foot tall Ferris wheel is now been proposed as of yesterday for West Harlem, right on the Hudson River. So it sounds to me like that would be in the West Harlem Piers Park vicinity.
That would be awesome.
So hot off the press. I don't know where that's going or if it goes anywhere, but just heard about it. So the other thing to note about this area over here, there's a great deal of TV and movie filming that's done in this area, particularly what I think some brokers have called Viaduct Valley, which you have the highway, the highway infrastructure over there, and it doesn't necessarily get a lot of vehicular traffic, or pedestrian traffic. So you'll see it in everything. Anytime, like especially where there's an ominous scene, you'll see it in Law and Order used a lot, Blue Bloods. I know in the most recent Spider-Man movie, they used that scene to shoot there. But you'll see everything shot in that vicinity, and it kind of gives this awesome architectural feel with the arches from the highway as a result of having a viaduct over there.
There is an area over there on Riverside Drive. Once you get past, I think it's maybe between 110 and 125, where it's like that elevated area of Riverside Drive. And I remember when I lived up there on LaSalle, that was the only place that I could consistently count on finding a parking spot, because there's a stretch where it's alternate side on both sides, but it's like a quarter-mile stretch of nothing but cars on each side. So just...
And your elevated highway portion almost.
Yeah, so no one wants to park up there. So, for me at the time, I couldn't afford $600 a month for a garage. So I was, hey, that was my go-to.
Yeah, and you're talking, that's from like 134th roughly down to, I'd say, around 123rd-ish or somewhere in that vicinity area. I don't know the exact boundary lines, but that's approximate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And then you can look down on either the Hudson or down toward like the old Fairway and the new buildings over there from Columbia. So I know that's a big part of it. But yeah, I can say, like, as far as the last thing I want to say about Manhattanville and right now in the new Columbia campus, Columbia continues their northward bound expansion. They had to relocate some people in order to accommodate this new campus. That includes Broadway at 148th Street. They built a new 12-story building, but they also built or bought, they haven't really done anything yet, at 147th and Broadway, which is near where I live, and they haven't announced what they plan on doing with that lot. But it just goes to show just with how large of an expansion that campus expansion is, and how it winds up impacting multiple neighborhoods as a result. But ultimately, it sounds like Columbia is going to have a major presence, really from the low 100s, let's say around 110 or so, all the way up into like the 180s, 190s, even into the 200s in Upper Manhattan. Especially, I know that they have that sports facility,
football field.
Yeah, the football field
and the tennis place.
Yeah, and I think they even have a crew team over there with their own launch, their water launch.
That's a very interesting part of town, that northern tip.
Yeah, and we're gonna have a whole separate episode talking about like Inwood, the Inwood area, and even the northern portion of Washington Heights. Broadway to Amsterdam, I know we've talked about that before. That's almost exclusively affordable housing. There's going to be a new construction rental building with a supermarket being constructed soon. It replaces the one-story supermarket that burned down in the 2010s. I don't remember exactly. I want to say around 7 years ago, something like that. This is entirely residential with the exception of small businesses, mostly along one side of Amsterdam Avenue. Also in Manhattanville, there's going to be and this is the next big topic in for the podcast, the Manhattanville Factory District City College campus. The Manhattanville Factory District, it's roughly from 125th Street to 128th between Amsterdam and Convent. It's a collection of former warehouses and brewery spaces. If you're familiar with Yingling beer, it was one of the early heirs, or one of their children, actually built a brewery space in that location over there, and that's what a lot of this space was back in the early 1900s. It's covering 4 acres and about 1.1 million square feet and about 20 buildings, and 4 buildings are going to be the main focal point of that, with wide landscape paths between some of the buildings leading to triangle-shaped block on a cobblestone street. So a little bit about on 23rd Street, you have the Flatiron Building. You have a little bit of that kind of feel with a cobblestone street over there. A little bit of a meatpacking district kind of feel to it over there, and it gives you a little bit of a sense. That first building, the one I was talking about, the brewery over here, also known as the Mink Building. It was one of the first buildings in that complex to be designed and redeveloped. It was the Bernheimer and Schwartz Brewery Complex. And breweries have had a place in that location since the early 1800s. And it was on vacant land in 1876 when a member of the Yingling brewing family bought a site to build his own brewery. Unfortunately, the venture failed, and it was bought by another wealthy brewer, Simon Bernheimer, and operated as the Bernheimer Schwartz Pilsner Brewery Company until Prohibition hit. And in 1930, the building was built by a fur storage company, and there were still some furs that were being stored in that building until the late 1990s. And that's why they call it the Mink Building, because you had a lot of mink fur coats being stored there for cold storage. Some of the other buildings in the complex, the Sweets Building, the Malt Building, and as we discussed in a prior episode, the Tasty Cake Factory Building, which has been rebuilt. Not to upset Hostess or Drake or any of the other competitors, but it's been renamed. The original Tasty Cake Factory couldn't be replaced, so they built a brand new one, all glass, more toward life sciences, biotech field. Within it, it's a mix of nonprofit and for-profit tenants, and ultimately there's going to be some restaurant and retail space available with it. I think one of the more important retail tenants, and I think this is among the reasons why I chose to buy in the area, Harlem Biospace. They're adding a second office space within the complex, within the factory district. And that was one of the things that really kind of, convinced me that I said, I'm like, this is going to be big, because if you think about it, Columbia is adding these major science center research buildings, onto their campus of just a few blocks away. You're having City College. They're adding 2 new science buildings, $600 million in investment from City College. The combination of the two in between is this Manhattanville Factory District. And that kind of sounds reminiscent to what happened over at MIT when they decided to expand their campus into an emerging area. And it created all of these biotech firms, and ultimately that's kind of what's happening here with Harlem Biospace. And certainly the Tasty Cake Factory, with the expectation of adding all these life science buildings. Now, the Tasty building just opened in the last year, so this is all new and fresh and all to be developed. But hopefully, this is an industry that's well needed and will flourish in the area. But we also,
all this money being spent on education, maybe people start to get smarter.
Yeah, well, that's the hope. And obviously, the fact of being located by both City College and by, Columbia, I mean, it's tremendous educational opportunities. Just through osmosis, if you move to Harlem, you're going to be a damn genius. Hopefully, that's one of the reasons why I bought there. You're already a genius. I don't know about that. I'm close, but not quite. In any case, we are starting to see some success, in the neighborhood. There's a new 11,000 square feet anchored tenant, Valestra Therapeutics. It's a New York drug discovery and therapeutics company researching novel approaches to cancer treatments. So along with that same theme, that's exactly what we were expecting. They haven't announced or anticipated an opening date yet, but it's in the works. And then finally, the last thing I want to talk about Manhattanville over here is City College. The south portion of the campus is located within Manhattanville. And, we'll have an entire episode on City College because it's so encompassing, so rich in history. It's produced more Nobel laureates than any other school in the nation. And it's City College. It's a CCN.
Iconic.
Yeah. So ultimately, and one of the facts I love to give about it is that there was a movie scout that called it and labeled his story on it is Hogwarts in Manhattan, because there's over 1,000 gargoyles and grotesques in the building. So pretty iconic over there. But you have but City College on that Manhattanville border area. You have the Spitzer architecture program. Elliot Spitzer, his family, former governor of New York, and resigned in disgrace. But that's a whole other story. That the family has. He went the way of most of them. Yeah, well, I think he's been teaching there and actually in real estate investing too. So maybe we'll have the opportunity to cross paths with him in an episode. Nice. But there's the 2 new science centers, and then they also added a new medical program several years ago. So, this is all the reasons why when I tell people, I'm like, this is a real emerging area, very, very interesting, to see the kind of opportunities. I'd say it hasn't flourished as fast as I thought it would, but it's still happening, and we're still seeing the improvements in the area, and it is definitely progressing in interesting ways. So that gives you, I guess, a basic rundown of the Manhattanville neighborhood, and I'm sure we'll probably cross paths and some other stories as we go through like the Harlem Stories space and cross paths with it. But for now, welcome to Manhattanville.
All right.
This is Adam and Mark, and this is Harlem Stories. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.